The stone steps bit cold against Kessara's knees as she scrubbed away yesterday's mud. Dawn light crept through the castle's narrow windows, painting everything gray and forgotten just like her. Her shoulders ached, not just from the scrubbing, but from the way she held herself hunched, small, a perpetual flinch waiting to happen. 15 years of this, 15 years of timing her movements like a deadly dance, memorizing every servant's routine so she could slip between shadows, because touch meant agony, and agony meant questions she couldn't answer. The bond mark beneath her sleeve pulsed with its familiar burn, a reminder that someone, somewhere, had found her wanting, rejected her before she'd even known what that meant. Kessara! Marta's voice echoed down the corridor. She flinched. Even her name felt too loud in the morning silence. Coming, she whispered, though her voice barely carried. Rising carefully, she pressed herself against the wall as two kitchen maids hurried past. Their chatter filled the space. Did you hear the king growled at the High Council yesterday? Nearly took the table apart, one whispered. Border stress, the other dismissed, though her voice trembled. Everything that mattered beyond these stone walls. Everything she'd never be part of. The herb garden waited below, bathed in golden light. Her sanctuary, the one place where she could move freely because no one else wanted the tedious work of tending moonflower and wolfsbane. But today felt different. The air held a charge she couldn't name, like the moments before lightning strikes. From somewhere above, she felt eyes on her. Alpha King Raivor Blackclaw stood at his window, silver-streaked hair catching the dawn. His gaze found her with the precision of a predator, and for one terrifying heartbeat, Kessara forgot to breathe. She'd been invisible to him for 15 years. What had changed?
The council chamber reeked of political posturing and barely contained aggression. Raivor sat rigid at the head of the massive oak table, every muscle coiled tight as his advisors debated border defenses. His wolf paced restlessly beneath his skin, unusual for a morning meeting. Usually, the beast remained dormant until evening runs through the forest. The northern packs grow bolder, General Marcus was saying, his scarred hands gesturing at the map spread before them. They test our boundaries nightly. Something's coming. The thought whispered through Raivor's mind without warning, and his fingers tightened on his chair's armrests. The massive doors opened silently. She entered like smoke, given form the servant girl with eyes that held too many secrets. Kessara moved between the wolves with practiced invisibility, setting crystal goblets filled with spring water before each council member. Yet today, his wolf's attention snapped to her like a bowstring drawn taut. She wore the same gray dress as always, her dark hair braided severely back. Nothing had changed. So why did the air suddenly taste of lightning and inevitability? When she reached his chair, her movements stuttered for half a heartbeat. Did she feel it too? This strange electricity that made his skin prickle with awareness. Your Majesty? Marcus's voice cut through his distraction. Raivor forced his attention back to the discussion, but part of him tracked her every step as she completed her duties, the way she avoided even accidental contact, the careful precision of her movements. As she reached the door, her foot caught slightly on the ancient stone threshold. His knuckles turned white, gripping the oak. A low vibration started in his chest, a growl he had to swallow before it reached his throat. But she caught herself, disappearing into the corridor before he could understand his own reaction. The council continued their debate, but Raivor heard only white noise. What in the seven hells was happening to his control?
Rain turned the castle steps into a treacherous slide as Kessara hurried toward the laundry quarters, arms full of freshly cleaned linens. The afternoon had darkened unexpectedly, matching the strange unease that had followed her since this morning. She'd felt him watching her during the council meeting. Alpha King Raivor's golden gaze had burned against her skin like brands, making her bond mark throb with unusual intensity. Focus, she commanded herself. Head down, stay invisible. But the rain made everything slippery, and the linens blocked half her vision. When her foot hit the slick stone, the world tilted sideways. She was falling. Strong hands caught her arm. Pain exploded across her shoulder where the bond mark lay hidden, white-hot agony that stole her breath and turned her vision to starbursts. She bit back a scream as General Marcus's grip tightened, steadying her against the steps. "Careful there," he said, his voice kind but distant. The pain was everything. Fire beneath her skin, spreading like poison through her veins. She couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, could only endure as the false bond burned like acid. A roar shattered the afternoon quiet. Raivor vaulted the final steps. His face transformed into something primal and terrifying. Golden eyes blazed with fury as he descended toward them, each step deliberate as a death sentence. Release her. The command hit like a physical blow. General Marcus's hands fell away instantly, confusion replacing kindness on his weathered features. Your Majesty, I was only... Now, the single word carried the weight of absolute authority and barely leashed violence. Even through her pain, Kessara felt the power rolling off him in waves. She stumbled backward, clutching the scattered linens to her chest like armor. What was happening? Why was the Alpha King defending a nobody maid? But as their eyes met across the rain-soaked steps, something shifted in the air between them, something that felt like destiny wrapped in thorns. The rain continued to fall, but the courtyard had gone deathly silent, and for the first time in 15 years, every eye was on her.
The silence stretched between them like a blade drawn across stone. Raivor stood motionless on the rain-slicked steps, his chest heaving, as if he'd run miles instead of simply defending what? A servant girl from a helpful gesture? General Marcus backed away slowly, hands raised in confusion. Your Majesty, I meant no harm. Leave us. The words came out rougher than intended, his voice still carrying the wolf's rage. Marcus hesitated, glancing between his king and the trembling girl clutching linens like a shield. Then military training overrode curiosity, and he bowed stiffly before retreating into the castle, which left Raivor alone with her. Kessara stood frozen against the stone wall, her dark eyes wide with something between terror and bewilderment. Rain plastered her hair to her skull, and he could see the rapid flutter of her pulse at her throat. Why did touching her cause such pain? The question burned through him, demanding answers he didn't have. You're hurt. It wasn't a question. He'd seen the way she'd flinched, the color draining from her face when Marcus grabbed her arm. She shook her head quickly. No, Your Majesty. I'm fine. Just clumsy. Liar. The word sat bitter on his tongue, but he didn't voice it. Instead, he took a careful step closer, noting how she pressed herself harder against the wall. Don't. The word escaped her lips like a prayer. Her boots scraped against the stone as she scrambled deeper into the corner, as if the damp moss were safer than him. He froze. Don't what? Don't come closer, please. Her voice cracked on the last word. Every instinct screamed at him to ignore her plea, to gather her close and discover why his wolf had claimed her as his, to protect. But the genuine fear in her eyes stopped him cold. What happened when he touched you? He asked instead, his voice gentler than he'd used in years. She clutched the linens tighter. Nothing. I told you. You screamed. The words hung between them like an accusation, because she had silently, but he'd heard it in the way her breath had caught, seen it in the line of agony that had carved itself across her features. Something was very wrong here. And until he understood what, she wasn't leaving his sight. Come, he commanded, turning toward the castle. You'll stay in quarters near the royal wing. Your Majesty, it's not a request.
The chamber felt like a golden cage. Kessara pressed her back against the heavy oak door, staring at luxury she'd never been meant to witness. Silk tapestries in deep blues and silvers covered the walls, and actual glass windows, not the narrow slits of the servant quarters, let in afternoon light that turned everything warm and welcoming. This is wrong. Everything about her presence here violated the natural order of things. From beyond her door came the steady tread of boots as guards took their positions. Not to keep others out, she realized with growing dread. To keep her in. The Alpha King's orders had been absolute. She would remain within his sight, under his protection, until he deemed otherwise. When she'd tried to protest, his golden eyes had flashed with something that made her wolf, the one she pretended didn't exist, whine in submission. A knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Enter, she called, then immediately regretted the presumption. Raivor filled the doorway like a storm given human form, his silver-streaked hair still damp from the rain. He'd changed into fresh clothes, black leather, and dark wool that emphasized the predatory grace of his movements. He stepped closer, his presence filling the room as he reached for the untouched tray on the table. You need to eat. Kessara moved to intercept him, instinct born of 15 years of servitude overriding common sense. I can get it, she said, reaching out. Their hands brushed over the silver pitcher. Kessara flinched, bracing for the white-hot agony that always followed skin-to-skin contact. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the scream to tear from her throat. 1 heartbeat, 2. Nothing. No fire, no acid, only a warmth that seeped from his skin to hers, soothing the ache that had lived in her shoulder for half her life. Her eyes flew open. Raivor was staring at their touching hands, his pupils blown wide, his breathing suddenly ragged. "It doesn't hurt," she whispered, the realization terrifying. "No," he agreed, his voice rough. "It doesn't." Neither of them moved to break the contact. The warmth spread up her arm like honey, and for the first time in 15 years, Kessara understood what touch was supposed to feel like. "This changes everything." The forest blurred past in shades of emerald and shadow as Raivor's horse carried them toward the northern border. For the first hour, Kessara had held her hands hovering inches from his waist, terrified that yesterday's miracle had been a fluke. But as the miles passed and exhaustion crept in, she had slumped against him, and the impossible truth had settled in. His touch didn't burn. It sang. Now she pressed her cheek against the solid warmth of his back, marveling at the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. 15 years of isolation, and she'd never known how starved she'd been for simple human contact. "This is madness," she'd protested when he'd announced she would accompany him on a security inspection. "I don't belong. Where I go, you go." His voice had brooked no argument. "Until I understand what happened yesterday, you stay within my sight." The small convoy of guards flanked them on all sides, their eyes constantly scanning the tree line. This wasn't just a routine patrol, something had them on edge. "There." Raivor's breath stirred her hair as he pointed toward a cluster of broken branches ahead. Signs of forced entry. The horses slowed, and Kessara felt the subtle shift in the group's energy. Weapons were checked, postures straightened. Even the forest seemed to hold its breath. That's when the howls began. They erupted from 3 directions at once, not the musical calls of pack wolves, but something darker, hungrier. Raivor cursed viciously, his arm tightening around her waist as their horse reared. "Rogues," one of the guards shouted. "At least 6. The first attacker burst from the underbrush like a nightmare given form, a massive gray wolf with foam flecking its muzzle and madness burning in its yellow eyes. It launched itself at the nearest guard with single-minded fury. Chaos erupted around them. Horses screamed and reared as more rogues poured from the forest. Steel rang against fang and claw as the guards fought for their lives. But Raivor's attention was focused entirely on her. "Hold tight," he commanded, then leaped from the horse's back in a fluid motion that stole her breath. She watched in stunned fascination as he hit the ground running and kept changing. Bones cracked and reformed, muscle rippled and expanded. His human form blurred into something magnificent and terrible. The massive black wolf that emerged was nothing like the rogues. Where they were chaos and hunger, he was controlled death. Silver-tipped fur gleamed in the dappled light as he positioned himself between her and the approaching threat with predatory precision. When the largest rogue charged, Raivor met it head-on with a snarl that shook the very trees. And watching him fight, watching the lethal grace with which he defended her, Kessara finally understood why her bondmark had gone silent in his presence. Because this wasn't about duty or protection. This was about possession. Pure, primal, and absolute. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, as she watched him tear through enemies to keep her safe, it sent liquid fire racing through her veins.
The great hall fell silent as Raivor strode through the massive doors, still carrying the scent of blood and forest on his clothes. Behind him, Kessara moved like a shadow, but not the invisible kind she'd perfected over 15 years. This shadow drew every eye in the room. Word of the rogue attack had already spread through the castle's stone corridors like wildfire. What hadn't spread yet was the truth of what his pack members had witnessed. Their alpha king shifting to wolf form for a servant girl, fighting with a savagery that bordered on madness. "Your Majesty." Elder Thane stepped forward, his weathered face creased with concern. "We heard about the attack. Thank the moon you're safe." Raivor nodded curtly, but his attention remained split between the conversation and the woman behind him. Every few heartbeats, his wolf demanded he turn and confirm she was still there, still breathing, still his to protect. He told himself it was strategy. If she was close, he could monitor the threat. It was a lie, of course, but it was a lie that let him sleep at night. The rogues were organized. he reported to the gathered council members. This wasn't random violence. Someone sent them. To what end? Elder Thane asked, but Raivor's focus shattered as he caught the faint tremor in Kessara's breathing. The adrenaline from the attack was wearing off, and delayed shock was setting in. Without conscious thought, he turned toward her. The movement caught every eye in the hall. Conversations died mid-sentence as the pack's leadership watched their king's attention fix on a maid with laser precision. Kessara. Her name left his lips like a command and a caress combined. Come, she hesitated, clearly aware of the stares burning into her from every direction. But when he extended his hand, an unmistakable gesture of invitation, she stepped forward and placed her fingers in his palm. The contact sent electricity racing up his arm, and he heard her soft intake of breath. Even now, hours after their first touch, the connection between them crackled like live flame. Around them, the great hall buzzed with whispered speculation. But Raivor found he didn't care. Let them wonder. Let them gossip. His wolf had made its choice, and strategic thinking be damned. You'll stay in the chambers adjoining mine, he announced, loud enough for every ear to catch. For your protection. It wasn't protection, and everyone in the room knew it. It was a claim, and the way Kessara's pulse fluttered against his thumb told him she understood that too.
The training courtyard echoed with the sound of steel on steel as Kessara watched Raivor demonstrate a basic defensive stance. 3 days had passed since the rogue attack, and true to his word, he hadn't let her out of his sight, which meant she'd been thrust into a world she'd never imagined. Trailing behind the Alpha King as he conducted pack business, sitting silently in corners during strategic meetings, learning the rhythm of a life lived in constant motion. Your turn. Raivor's voice cut through her wandering thoughts. He held out a practice blade, its dulled edge gleaming in the afternoon sun. Kessara stared at the weapon like it might bite her. Your Majesty, I don't think. Raivor, he corrected, the same patient tone he'd used every time she forgot. And you need to learn to defend yourself. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. You said you'd protect me. Something dark and possessive flashed in his golden eyes. I will, but I can't be everywhere at once, and what happened with the rogues proved that threats exist I didn't anticipate. Because of me. The unspoken words hung between them like smoke. Those rogues had come for her, she was certain of it, even if she couldn't understand why. Reluctantly, she accepted the blade, immediately wincing at its weight. The metal felt foreign in her palm, nothing like the familiar tools of service she'd wielded her entire life. Here, Raivor moved behind her, his chest pressing against her back as his hands covered hers on the hilt. Don't fight the weight, he murmured against her ear. You spend your whole life making yourself small, Kessara. Here, you have to take up space. Swing through, not at. His breath stirred her hair, and Kessara had to close her eyes against the wave of sensation that crashed over her. 3 days of constant proximity had done nothing to diminish the effect of his touch. If anything, it had grown stronger. Now, he continued, his voice rough velvet, imagine someone threatens what you care about. What would you do? She turned within the circle of his arms, meeting his gaze. I'd run. Wrong answer. His hands tightened on hers, and something primal flickered in his expression. You'd fight. Because what's worth protecting is worth bleeding for. The intensity in his voice stole her breath. Was he talking about combat training, or something else entirely? Before she could ask, his head tilted sharply toward the courtyard entrance. A low growl rumbled in his chest, so quiet she felt it more than heard it. What? We have company, he said, stepping protectively in front of her. Alpha Kirin Northwind emerged from the castle's shadows, moving with predatory grace to lean casually against the weapon rack. A calculated display of disrespect that made Raivor's jaw clench. The man's pale blue eyes swept the courtyard before settling on Kessara with unmistakable interest. Alpha Blackclaw, Kirin called, plucking a practice sword from the rack and testing its balance with obvious familiarity. I hope we're not interrupting anything. Important. The way he said the last word made Kessara's skin crawl, but it was the hunger in his gaze as it lingered on her that made her step closer to Raivor's protective shadow. Alpha Northwind. Raivor's voice carried winter's bite. This is unexpected. Is it? Kirin's smile was all teeth and no warmth. I heard rumors about an unmated female in your territory. Naturally, I came to investigate. The temperature in the courtyard seemed to drop 10 degrees. The formal dining hall had been transformed into a diplomatic battlefield, and Kessara felt like prey caught between circling predators. She sat at the high table, positioned between Raivor and Elder Thane, acutely aware that her presence at such a gathering violated every rule of pack hierarchy. Servants didn't dine with alphas, they served them. But Raivor had made his position clear. Where he went, she went, even if it meant turning centuries of tradition on its head. Your hospitality is, as always, impeccable, Alpha Kieran said, raising his goblet in a mock toast. Though I confess surprise at your dining companions. Raivor's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. My pack, my rules. Of course. Kieran's pale eyes fixed on Kessara with predatory focus, though one wonders about the wisdom of elevating an unmated female to such prominence. It sends mixed signals. The insult hit like a physical blow, and Kessara felt heat flame in her cheeks. Around the table, conversations died as pack members strained to hear how their alpha would respond to such blatant disrespect. Careful, Northwind. Raivor's voice carried the promise of violence. You're speaking about someone under my protection. Protection. Kieran savored the word like fine wine. Such an interesting choice of words. Tell me, Alpha Blackclaw, what exactly are you protecting her from? The question hung in the air like a blade poised to fall. Because they all knew the answer. An unmated female was fair game for any alpha strong enough to claim her. Traditional pack law gave Kieran the right to challenge for her, which was exactly what he was doing. Perhaps, Kieran continued with silky malice, the lady would benefit from hearing about other options available to her. My pack values strength, beauty, and proper breeding. Proper breeding. The insult flared hot in Kessara's chest, hotter than her bond mark ever had. She felt a strange vibration in her fingertips, a high-pitched hum that seemed to sync with her racing heartbeat. The heavy silver goblet in her grip didn't just crack, it shattered outward, wine exploding like blood across the white tablecloth. Crystal shards scattered across the table as conversations died completely. Silence descended on the hall like a shroud. Kieran leaned forward, his pale eyes bright with sudden hunger. How fascinating. It seems your little maid has hidden depths. Raivor was on his feet before the last word left Kieran's mouth, power radiating from him in waves that made every wolf in the room take notice. This audience is over. Oh, I don't think so. Kieran stood as well, his smile sharp as broken glass. I invoke the right of inquiry. If this female possesses abilities beyond the mundane, then her status changes considerably. No. The word screamed through Kessara's mind as she realized what was happening. The right of inquiry was ancient law. Any alpha could demand a formal evaluation of an unmated female's bloodline and abilities. If they found what she feared, they would find. If they discovered she was more than just a servant with a mysterious bond mark. 3 days hence, Kieran announced with obvious satisfaction. Under the full moon, let's see exactly what secrets your little maid has been hiding. As the Northwind delegation filed out of the hall, Kessara met Raivor's gaze across the ruins of their carefully constructed normalcy. Everything is about to change, his golden eyes seemed to say, and this time, there would be no going back.
The stable yard lay wrapped in pre-dawn darkness when Raivor caught the scent that made his blood turn to ice. Fear, desperation, and underneath it all, the wild rose fragrance that belonged to only one person. He found Kessara in the shadows between the grain stores, a small pack clutched in her trembling hands. She'd changed back into her servant's dress, the gray wool that had been her armor for 15 years. Going somewhere? His voice cut through the silence like a blade. She spun, her dark eyes wide with guilt and something that looked like grief. Raivor, I thought you were still in the war room. I was, until I realized you weren't where you belonged. He stepped closer, noting how she clutched the pack like a shield. Answer the question. 18. Her chin lifted with defiance that would have been admirable if it weren't so misplaced. I'm leaving. Before Kieran tears your pack apart over something that was never real in the first place. Never real? The words hit him like physical blows. What we have isn't real. What we have is a mistake. The words burst from her lips with desperate force. I'm not some hidden princess or mysterious bloodline, Raivor. I'm damaged goods with a rejection mark that proves someone else found me wanting. And now I'm going to cost you your crown. Liar, his wolf snarled. She's lying to herself. Show me. The command left his lips before conscious thought. What? The mark. You've hidden it from me for a week. If you're so certain it proves you're broken, show me. Kessara backed against the stable wall, shaking her head. It won't change anything. Show me. For a moment, he thought she'd refuse. Then her shoulders sagged in defeat, and she pulled down the sleeve of her dress. The mark that blazed silver in the moonlight wasn't what either of them expected.
Kessara stared at her shoulder in numb shock, as Raivor's fingers hovered inches from the mark that had tormented her for 15 years. Except, it wasn't a mark anymore. Where ugly scar tissue had twisted her skin, intricate lines of silver now traced patterns that seemed to shift in the moonlight. Not random scars, deliberate symbols that pulsed with their own inner light. This isn't a rejection mark, Raivor said, his voice rough with wonder and growing understanding. This is a seal. What? The word came out as barely a whisper. I've seen similar markings in the old texts. Concealment spells designed to hide magical abilities. His golden eyes met hers with fierce intensity. Someone didn't reject you, Kessara. Someone was protecting you. That's impossible. But even as the thought formed, memories began surfacing, fragments she'd dismissed as childhood nightmares. A woman with silver hair singing lullabies about moon-touched children, whispered warnings about those who would steal her light. From what? She asked. From people who would use your power for... Pain exploded across her shoulder as the symbols flared brilliant white. But this wasn't the familiar agony of rejection. This was something breaking apart, unraveling, setting her free. The seal dissolved like mist before morning sun, and with it came the memories. Running through moonlit gardens while shadows gave chase. A woman's scream cut short. Hands that glowed with starlight pressing the seal into her skin as darkness closed around them both. Antler Allay, she gasped, as the truth crashed over her like a tidal wave. Raivor caught her as she swayed, his touch anchoring her to the present, even as the past tried to drag her under. What do you remember? She saved me. My mother's sister, she died to keep me hidden. Kessara looked down at her hands, half expecting them to glow with inner fire. I'm not broken. The temperature dropped 30 degrees in the span of a heartbeat. Shadows began moving independently of their sources, reaching toward them with hungry tendrils that made the horses scream in terror. And from the darkness came laughter that sounded like breaking glass and old graves. How touching. A voice purred from everywhere and nowhere at once. A reunion 15 years in the making. Though I must admit, little moonchild, you've caused me considerable inconvenience.
The figure that materialized from the writhing shadows wasn't fully there, more projection than presence, but terrifying all the same. Tall and pale with eyes the color of fresh blood, power radiating from him in waves that made the stable walls groan under the pressure. Valdris, the name whispered through Raivor's mind like a curse. Let me guess, the sorcerer continued with casual malice. You thought breaking the seal would free her? How delightfully naive. Raivor moved protectively in front of Kessara, his wolf clawing toward the surface. What do you want? What's mine by right of prophecy and blood? Valdris's smile revealed teeth too sharp to be human. The moon touched was promised to me before she drew her first breath. That pathetic concealment spell merely delayed the inevitable. I'll never. Kessara started to step forward, but Valdris gestured casually. Invisible force slammed her back against the stable wall hard enough to crack the ancient wood. She cried out as ghostly chains wrapped around her wrists and throat. Raivor's vision went red. With a roar that shook dust from the rafters, he launched himself at the projection. His claws met empty air, but the attack disrupted Valdris's concentration enough that the chains dissolved. Kessara collapsed, gasping. Spirited, Valdris observed with amusement. I can see why she chose you as a temporary distraction. But make no mistake, Alpha King, when the right of inquiry forces her to reveal her full power, the wards around this pathetic castle will shatter like glass, and I will come to collect what was always mine. The projection began to fade, but his voice echoed with terrifying certainty. 2 days, children. Try to keep her alive until then. She's so much more useful breathing. Silence fell like a hammer blow. Kessara struggled to her feet, her face pale but determined. Now you understand, she whispered. I'm not just some servant with mysterious past. I'm the weapon everyone's been hunting for. Raivor pulled her into his arms, feeling how perfectly she fit against him. No, you're not a weapon. You're mine. And if that bastard thinks he can take you, His wolf surged to the surface, lending steel to his voice. He's about to learn why they call me the Alpha King. But even as he spoke the words with absolute conviction, a cold certainty settled in his chest. The real war was just beginning, and this time, running wasn't an option.
The War Council had transformed into something resembling a battlefield command center, maps and weapons scattered across every available surface. But Kessara barely registered the chaos around her as she stood before the assembled pack leadership, their faces ranging from skeptical to openly hostile. "You're asking us to go to war," Elder Thane said, his weathered hands gripping the table's edge, "against a sorcerer of legend, for a woman whose very presence threatens everything we've built. Her presence threatens nothing." Raivor's voice carried the bite of absolute authority. "Valdris threatens everything, and he won't stop with her." Counselor Marcus, the same man whose innocent touch had started this cascade, shook his graying head. "The right of inquiry is tomorrow night. If we simply allow Alpha Kieran to conduct his evaluation." "You mean if we throw her to the wolves?" Raivor cut him off with deadly quiet. "She is the wolf!" The words exploded from Counselor Elena, her usual composure cracking under strain. "Don't you see? The prophecies speak of one who will bridge magic and nature, but they also warn of the chaos that follows. Cities burned, packs torn apart. Stop." Kessara's voice carried across the room with unexpected strength, and she felt power hum beneath her skin in response to her emotion. Every eye turned to her, and she watched 3 wolves, including Elena, take instinctive steps backward as silver light flickered around her fingers. The fear in their faces cut deeper than any blade. "They're afraid of me, not Valdris. Me." Instead of shrinking back into shadows, she stepped forward. "You're talking about me like I'm not here, like I don't have a choice in my own fate. Do you?" Elder Thane's question held genuine curiosity alongside the challenge. "Can you control what you are? What you're becoming?" Kessara looked down at her hands, the same hands that had shattered crystal with a touch, that now hummed with power she was only beginning to understand. The silver light pulsed brighter, and she forced it back with effort that left her breathless. "I don't know. But I know I won't let Valdris use me to destroy innocent people." "Then what do you propose?" Counselor Marcus asked, though he kept his distance. Before she could answer, Raivor moved to stand beside her, his presence both shield and statement. "We fight, together, as pack. And if we lose?" Elena's voice held the weight of a mother's fear for her children. Raivor's golden eyes found Kessara's, and in them she saw absolute conviction. "Then we lose fighting for what we choose to protect, not cowering from what we fear." The silence that followed felt brittle as glass. Then Elder Thane straightened, ancient dignity filling his frame. "The Black Claw Pack has never bowed to threats. I see no reason to start now." One by one, the others nodded agreement. Not enthusiasm, this wasn't a battle anyone wanted, but the grim acceptance of wolves who would stand with their alpha regardless of the cost. "Thank you," Kessara whispered, throat tight with emotion she hadn't expected. "Don't thank us yet," Elder Thane said with dark humor. "Ask us again if we survive what's coming."
The castle's highest tower offered a view of the entire territory, miles of forest and moonlight that had been Blackclaw land for 6 generations. Tomorrow night, it might all burn. Raivor stood at the window, hyper-aware of Kessara behind him as she paced the chamber with restless energy. The bond mark's revelation had changed her not just physically, but in ways that ran deeper than flesh and bone. Power radiated from her now like heat from a forge. "You should sleep," he said without turning around. "So should you." Her reflection appeared in the glass beside his, and he caught his breath at the sight of silver threads now woven through her dark hair. The transformation was accelerating. "I can't stop thinking about what Elena said." She moved to stand beside him, her shoulder brushing his arm. "The prophecies. What if she's right? What if saving me destroys everything you've built?" He turned to face her fully, noting the way moonlight seemed to cling to her skin. "Do you trust me? With my life? Then trust this. I would rather see my kingdom burn than watch you break under the weight of others' expectations." His hands framed her face, thumbs tracing her cheekbones. "You're not a weapon, Kessara. You're not a tool or a symbol or a threat. You're the woman. The words stuck in his throat, too large and terrifying to voice. "The woman you what?" she whispered. Instead of answering with words, he kissed her. The moment their lips met, the world exploded into sensation. Not just desire, though. Heat raced through his veins like wildfire, but something deeper. A recognition that went bone deep, soul deep, to places where his human mind couldn't follow, but his wolf knew with absolute certainty. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, silver light danced between Kessara's fingers like captured starshine. "Just us," she whispered. "No," he said, pulling back slightly to look into her eyes. "More than that." He brought his wrist to his mouth and bit down, drawing blood, the scent of it rich, iron. Alpha hit her senses like a physical blow. "A temporary bond," he explained, offering his wrist to her. "To anchor your mind to mine. So when he tries to get in, he finds me waiting." It was an intimacy deeper than skin, more binding than law. Kessara hesitated only a heartbeat before pressing her lips to the wound. As his blood hit her tongue, a golden thread snapped into place between their minds. "I have you." His voice echoed in her head, warm as summer and strong as steel. Always. The connection settled between them like coming home, and for the first time since her world had turned upside down, Kessara felt truly safe.
The scrying mirror in Valdris's tower showed him everything he needed to see. The Alpha King and his pet sorceress, lost in each other's arms while their pathetic castle prepared for siege. How touching, how utterly useless against the forces gathering in the shadows beyond their borders. "Master?" The voice belonged to Kieran Northwind, though the man who spoke bore little resemblance to the proud Alpha who had entered Blackclaw territory 3 days ago. Dark veins now traced patterns across his pale skin, and his once blue eyes had turned the color of old blood. "Yes, my faithful hound? The packs you summoned are in position. 600 wolves, all bound to your will through the corruption ritual. They await your command." Valdris smiled, revealing teeth that belonged in nightmares. "Excellent. And our inside source?" "Positioned and ready. When the rite of inquiry begins and the castle's wards focus inward, she'll ensure the barriers fail completely." The sorcerer's reflection in the mirror showed satisfaction bordering on glee. 15 years of hunting, of following cold trails and chasing shadows, all leading to this moment. The moon touched had finally awakened to her power, and in doing so, had doomed everyone she sought to protect. "The irony is exquisite," he mused, trailing one pale finger along the mirror's surface. "She breaks the concealment spell to save her precious pack, never realizing that her unleashed power is exactly what I need to tear through their defenses. And the Alpha King? Kill him slowly. I want her to watch. Grief and rage will make her power burn brighter." Valdris's smile widened. The prophecy speaks of a bridge between worlds, but it fails to mention the toll required to build it. Every bridge needs a foundation of bones. In the mirror, he watched Kessara trace patterns of light in the air while her mate held her close. So much power, and she had no idea how to control it, how to stop it, when the time came. But something had changed. There was a new thread connecting them now, golden and strong, where before there had been only attraction and desperate hope. "Interesting," he murmured. "The Alpha King grows clever. A blood bond to anchor her mind." His laugh held the sound of breaking glass. "No matter. When I tear his throat out before her eyes, that precious connection will become her greatest weakness. Shared pain, shared death. Tomorrow night," he whispered to the darkness. "When the moon reaches its peak and the rite of inquiry forces her to reveal her full strength, I'll finally claim what was always mine." Far below in the castle, Kessara suddenly stiffened in Raivor's arms, her newly awakened senses catching the barest whisper of malevolent attention focused on her like the crosshairs of a rifle. "He's watching," she breathed. Through their new bond, she felt Raivor's arms tighten around her, his protective fury mixing with her own fear and determination. "Let him watch. Tomorrow, we show him what it means to threaten our pack." But even as he spoke with conviction that could move mountains, both of them felt the weight of eyes that saw too much, and the certainty that their enemy was always one step ahead. The final battle was coming, and they were walking into a trap.
The ceremonial circle in the castle's great courtyard had been carved from stone by Raivor's ancestors 3 centuries ago, but tonight it felt like a sacrificial altar. Torches burned in iron braziers around the perimeter, casting dancing shadows across the assembled crowd. Representatives from 7 packs had come to witness the rite of inquiry, some out of curiosity, others drawn by rumors of power beyond their understanding. And standing at the circle's heart, Kieran Northwind looked nothing like the proud Alpha who had first challenged for Kessara's hand. Dark veins traced spiderweb patterns across his pale skin, visible even in the flickering torchlight. His once blue eyes had turned the color of old blood, and when he smiled, his teeth seemed too sharp for a human mouth. Corrupted, Raivor's wolf snarled. He reeks of dark magic. Are you ready to proceed, Alpha Blackclaw? Kieran's voice carried harmonics that shouldn't exist in a human throat. Raivor glanced toward the castle's main entrance, where Kessara stood flanked by Elder Thane and 2 guards. Even at this distance, he could feel her terror through their new bond, not fear of pain, but fear of what her unleashed power might do to the innocent people surrounding them. I'm here, he sent through their connection. Whatever happens, I'm here. Her response came back steady despite her fear. I know. I love you. The words hit him like a physical blow, and for a moment, he forgot how to breathe. She'd never said it before, neither of them had, but facing the possibility of losing everything had a way of clarifying priorities. I love you too, he sent back. Fight, Kessara. Whatever it takes. The ceremony begins, Kieran announced, raising his arms to the blood moon hanging fat and red above them. Let the moon touched reveal her true nature. Power exploded outward from the corrupted Alpha like a shockwave. But this wasn't the clean silver light that flowed from Kessara. This was something hungry and wrong, tasting of graves and old bones. The force hit the castle's protective wards with a sound like breaking glass, and through the cracks that appeared in the ancient barriers, Raivor caught the scent of 600 hostile wolves drawing closer through the darkness. It's a trap, he snarled, but his voice was lost in the roar of splintering magic as the castle's defenses began to crumble.
Pain exploded across Kessara's consciousness as the castle's wards shattered like crystal struck by a hammer. Through her bond with Raivor, she felt his shock and fury as the full scope of Valdris's deception became clear. This had never been about the right of inquiry, that was just the mechanism to force her power into the open, to create the cracks their enemy needed to bring down the barriers that protected everyone she cared about. Raivor! She started toward the circle, but Elder Thane's weathered hand caught her arm. The wards are failing, he said, his face grim. If you enter that circle now, there'll be nothing to contain your power when it breaks loose. If I don't, he'll tear the castle apart stone by stone. Around them, chaos erupted as corrupted wolves poured through the gaps in the failing defenses. These weren't rogues, driven mad by isolation. These were pack wolves twisted by dark magic, their eyes burning with unnatural hunger. Kessara watched in horror as Counselor Elena fell beneath 3 attackers, her scream cut short in a spray of blood. Across the courtyard, Marcus fought back-to-back with 2 guards, but they were being pushed steadily toward the castle walls. This is my fault, the thought crashed through her mind with devastating clarity. They're dying because of what I am. Through their bond, she felt Raivor's desperate battle to reach her. But there were too many enemies between them, and with each passing moment, more corrupted wolves streamed through the broken barriers. I have to end this, she whispered. Child, no. Elder Thane's grip tightened. The moment you unleash your full power, Valdris will. His words were cut off as something massive and shadowy erupted from the ground beneath their feet. Claws like obsidian blades swept toward them, and Kessara threw up her hands instinctively. Silver light blazed from her palms, meeting the shadow creature in a collision that lit up the night sky. But the effort tore something loose inside her chest, and she felt her careful control begin to slip. Not yet, she begged, whatever force controlled her destiny. Please, not yet. But power was already pouring from her like water through a broken dam, and in the distance, she heard laughter that sounded like breaking glass and old graves. Valdris had found his opening. The world narrowed to a tunnel of pain and silver fire as power tore through Kessara's body without restraint. She knelt in the center of the ceremonial circle, her hands pressed to the ancient stone as magic poured from her in waves that made the very air scream. Around her, the battle raged with desperate intensity. Wolves fighting corrupted shadows, steel ringing against unnatural claws. But she could barely see any of it through the agony consuming her from within. This is what happens when you try to be more than you are, a voice whispered in her mind. Not Raivor's warmth, but something cold and mocking. This is what your precious love gets you. Through the chaos, she caught glimpses of the carnage her uncontrolled power was causing. Ancient stones cracked and crumbled. Trees burst into flame. And worst of all, she could feel the life force being drained from every person within 100 yards as her magic consumed everything in its reach. including Raivor. Through their bond, she felt his strength flickering like a candle in a hurricane. He was still fighting, would always be fighting, but the connection that should have anchored her was killing him by inches. "Stop," she sobbed, but the power wouldn't listen. It had been caged too long, hidden too deep, and now that it was free, it wanted to burn. That's when she felt it, a presence vast and ancient pressing against the edges of her consciousness. Valdris, no longer hiding behind projections and corrupted servants. He materialized within the circle like a nightmare-given form, his pale skin gleaming with unnatural light. But it was his eyes that truly terrified her, not the blood red she'd seen before, but empty black voids that seemed to swallow light itself. "Hello, little moonchild," he purred, stepping closer as her silver fire parted around him like water around a stone. "You've grown even more beautiful than I imagined. Stay away from her." Raivor's voice cracked like a whip across the courtyard, but when Kessara looked up through her tears, she saw him trapped behind a wall of corrupted wolves 20 yards away. "The faithful dog," Valdris observed with amusement, still trying to protect what was never his to claim. Power lashed out from the sorcerer's hands, not aimed at her, but at Raivor. Shadow-wrapped chains erupted from the ground, wrapping around the Alpha King's arms and legs with crushing force. Through their bond, Kessara felt his bones crack. "No!" She tried to rise, tried to help, but her uncontrolled magic drove her back to her knees. Valdris gestured casually, and the shadow chains tightened. The sound of snapping ribs echoed across the courtyard, and Raivor's scream of agony tore through their bond like a blade to her heart. "You see," Valdris continued conversationally, "the prophecy requires your power to be forged in perfect agony, but I'm not without mercy." His smile was all teeth and malice. "I'll make you a bargain." Another gesture. Another bone broke. Raivor's face had gone gray with pain, but his golden eyes remained fixed on hers with desperate love. "Submit to me willingly, body, mind, and magic, and I let the dog live. Refuse." The chains tightened again, and blood began to trickle from Raivor's mouth. "And I'll break him piece by piece while you watch." Through their bond, she felt Raivor trying to speak, trying to tell her not to give in, but his breath was too shallow, his pain too great. Kessara looked at the man who had saved her from invisibility, who had shown her what it meant to be chosen instead of rejected, the man whose strength was failing because their connection was draining him while her power raged out of control. "I'm sorry," she sent through their bond, pouring all her love into the words. "Forgive me." Before he could respond, she severed the golden thread connecting their minds. The psychic backlash hit her like a physical blow, but it was nothing compared to the agony in Raivor's eyes as he realized what she'd done. Without their bond to anchor him, he collapsed to his knees, looking utterly broken. "I submit," she whispered, rising on trembling legs. "I'll come willingly. Just, please don't hurt him anymore." Valdris's smile widened as he extended one pale hand toward her. Such a wise choice. The moment her fingers touched his, darkness exploded around them. Through the swirling shadows, she caught one last glimpse of Raivor struggling to his feet, his mouth open in a soundless roar of rage and despair. Then the world dissolved into nothing, and she was gone. Raivor was left alone in the ruins of his castle, surrounded by the dead and dying, with nothing but the echo of severed love and the taste of failure bitter as poison on his tongue. The Alpha King had lost everything.
Dawn broke over the ruins of Blackclaw Castle like a mockery of hope. Raivor knelt among the rubble of the ceremonial circle, his hands pressed to the scorched stones where Kessara had last stood. The severed bond in his mind felt like an open wound, a constant ache that reminded him of everything he'd failed to protect. Around him, the survivors worked in grim silence, pulling bodies from collapsed walls, tending wounds that might never heal, trying to salvage something from the devastation. 37 dead, twice that many injured. And their Luna, his Luna, stolen away by a monster who planned to use her light to forge weapons of unimaginable darkness. "Your Majesty." Elder Thane's voice carried exhaustion, and something that might have been reproach. "The wounded need tending. The pack needs leadership." Raivor didn't look up. Couldn't look up, because if he stopped searching these stones for some trace of her presence, some hint of where Valdris had taken her, then he'd have to accept that she was truly gone. "My king," Thane's tone sharpened, "your people are dying. She is my people." The words came out raw and broken. Without her, none of this matters. That's where you're wrong. The voice didn't belong to Thane. Raivor's head snapped up to find Marcus approaching, his arm bound in blood-stained cloth but his eyes burning with fierce determination. She didn't sacrifice herself so you could kneel here feeling sorry for yourself, the general continued. She did it to save us, to give us a chance to fight back. Fight back with what? Raivor's laugh held no humor. Half our pack is dead or broken, our defenses are shattered. And Valdris has exactly what he wanted, her power under his control. My control didn't save her, Raivor whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. It bound me. Valdris uses raw magic, primal force, and I tried to use strategy, logic, control. His hands clenched into fists. We lost, because I refused to be what I am. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in his life, he didn't leash the beast inside. He didn't calculate or strategize or maintain the careful balance between man and wolf that had defined his entire reign. Instead, he opened the door. Take it, he told the wolf. Take all of it. Just get her back. The change was instantaneous and total. Not the partial shift of battle, but complete integration of every wild, primal instinct he'd spent 32 years controlling. When he opened his eyes, they weren't human golden anymore. They were liquid amber with vertical slits that belonged to something far older and more dangerous than any crown could contain. Around him, his surviving pack members took instinctive steps backward, because the man kneeling in the ruins wasn't their alpha king anymore. He was something primal, something that remembered what wolves were before they learned to bow to human concepts like mercy and restraint. Where would he take her? The voice that emerged from Raivor's throat carried harmonics that made the very stones vibrate. The Shadow Peak Fortress, Marcus said without hesitation, though his voice had gone rough with awe and fear. It's the only place with wards strong enough to contain her power while he works to corrupt it fully. Then that's where we go. Raivor rose to his feet, with liquid grace, and power radiated from him, like heat from a forge. Who rides with me to bring our Luna home? The response came as one voice, but now it carried the weight of wolves following something they recognized as truly alpha. We do.
The chamber in Shadow Peak Fortress was a masterwork of controlled horror. Kessara hung suspended in the center of the circular room, her wrists and ankles bound by chains that hummed with dark magic. But the true prison wasn't the metal, it was the web of spells Valdris had woven around her, each thread designed to slowly drain her will while amplifying her power. She'd been fighting it for 2 days now, but she could feel herself growing weaker. Not physically, the sorcerer needed her healthy for whatever ritual he was planning. But mentally, emotionally, the constant whispers in her mind were taking their toll. You're alone now. He abandoned you. They all abandoned you. No, she told herself firmly. Raivor would never abandon me. Then where is he? Why hasn't he come? She tried to remember the warmth of their bond, the golden thread that had connected their minds. But there was only cold emptiness where that connection used to be, and with each passing hour, it became harder to recall what love had felt like. Ah, you're awake. Valdris entered the chamber with the casual confidence of a predator who knew his prey couldn't escape. I was beginning to worry the conversion process was moving too quickly. Conversion? The word came out as a croak. Her throat was raw from screaming during the first night, when he'd tested the limits of her pain tolerance. Darkness to light, despair to hope, it's all a matter of perspective. He moved to a table laden with instruments that belonged in nightmares. Your power is magnificent, child, but it needs refinement, proper direction. I'll never help you. Oh, but you already are. He selected a blade that seemed to drink in the light from the torches. Every moment you spend here, every drop of hope that leaks away, makes your magic darker, more useful. The knife drew a thin line across her palm, and Kessara bit back a cry as her blood began to glow with sickly light silver shot through with black veins that pulsed like a diseased heartbeat. No, this isn't me. This isn't who I am. But even as she thought it, she could feel the corruption spreading through her veins like poison. Soon, she wouldn't remember why she was fighting. Soon, she'd want nothing more than to please the voice that whispered such beautiful lies about power and purpose. Soon, she'd become the weapon Valdris needed to reshape the world. In the distance, Thunder rumbled, or maybe that was the sound of her hope finally dying.
Shadow Peak Fortress rose from the mountainside like a cancer of black stone and twisted metal. Raivor crouched behind an outcropping of rock a mile from the fortress walls, studying the defenses with senses that had transcended human limitation. Beside him, the remnants of his pack waited with the patience of wolves preparing to hunt. They'd lost good people getting this far. The journey through the Shadowlands had cost them 8 fighters, including young Sarah, who'd taken a corrupted arrow meant for Marcus. But the 29 who remained burned with a fury that made them more dangerous than any army. The main gate is heavily warded, Marcus reported, pointing toward the massive iron portcullis that sealed the fortress entrance. But there, he indicated a narrow ledge that wound around the fortress's eastern wall. The stones there are older. The wards might be weaker. Might be? Elder Thane's voice carried skepticism. Through the severed bond, Raivor could feel nothing, but sometimes, in the moments between heartbeats, he could swear he sensed her pain calling to something deep in his chest. A low howl echoed across the mountainside, the signal from their scout that the patrol routes had been mapped. Time to move. Remember, Raivor said, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. We're not here for glory or revenge. We're here for her. Everything else is secondary. They moved like ghosts across the rocky terrain. 29 shadows converging on a fortress that had never fallen to any assault in 3 centuries of existence. But it had never been assaulted by something primal, leading wolves fighting for their Luna. As they reached the base of the eastern wall, Raivor pressed his palm against the ancient stones. The wards hummed with power that would have repelled any normal assault, any strategic approach. Old Raivor would have looked for a weak point, a clever way around the defenses. Primal Raivor didn't care about weak points. He opened his mouth and roared, not a sound, but a frequency that existed somewhere between the physical and the magical. The note that every caged thing sang when it finally broke free. The impregnable wards didn't just fade, they exploded, ancient stones cracking and magical barriers shattering like glass in a hurricane. Alarms began wailing throughout the fortress as he stepped through the smoking breach, his pack flowing behind him like a tide of death and determination. "We're in," he said, and his voice carried the promise of vengeance to every corner of Shadow Peak Fortress. Somewhere in the darkness above, Kessara lifted her head as something that felt like hope stirred in her chest. He was coming.
The ritual chamber doors exploded inward in a shower of splinters and ancient magic. Through the smoking breach came something that stole Kessara's breath, not just Raivor, but Raivor transformed into something magnificent and terrible. His eyes burned with amber fire, and power radiated from him in waves that made the very stones of Shadow Peak Fortress tremble. Behind him flowed his pack like a river of death and devotion, but Kessara only had eyes for him. He came. He actually came. "Hello, little sorcerer." Raivor's voice carried harmonics that belonged to something far older than human civilization. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Valdris spun from the altar where he'd been preparing the final corruption ritual, his face twisting with fury and disbelief. "Impossible. The wards are dust." Raivor stepped into the chamber, and the corrupted chains holding Kessara began to smoke where his presence touched them. "Did you really think stone and spell could keep me from my mate?" "She's not your mate anymore," Valdris shrieked, gesturing toward Kessara's suspended form. "Look at her. See how the darkness flows through her veins. She's mine now, body and soul." For a terrifying moment, Kessara felt the truth in his words. The corruption had spread so far, taken so much. Silver light still flickered in her core, but it was shot through with black veins that pulsed with Valdris's influence. "I'm lost," she thought with devastating clarity. Too far gone to save. But then Raivor's amber gaze found hers across the chamber, and in his eyes she saw something that shattered every whisper of doubt. Not horror at her corruption, not disappointment in her weakness, just love, pure, absolute, and unshakable. "Kessara," he said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. "Come home." The command wasn't directed at her mind or her magic. It called to something deeper, the part of her soul that had recognized him from the first moment their eyes met, the part that no amount of torture or corruption could ever truly touch. "I can't," she whispered. But even as she spoke, she felt something stirring in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with magic and everything to do with choice. "Yes, you can." Raivor began walking toward her, ignoring the dark magic that lashed out from Valdris's hands. Where the sorcerer's power struck him, it simply slid away, as if primal force was too fundamental to be corrupted by artificial darkness. "She belongs to me!" Valdris screamed, pouring more power into his attack. "She belongs to herself," Raivor replied, never breaking stride. "She always has." And suddenly, Kessara understood. All this time, she'd been fighting the corruption with her magic, trying to burn it away with silver fire. But magic could be twisted, could be used and perverted and bent to another's will. Love couldn't be. Choice couldn't be. "I choose him," she thought, and the black veins in her power began to crack. "I choose us. I choose light." The transformation was instantaneous and total. Every thread of Valdris's influence shattered like glass as silver fire blazed through her veins, pure and clean and hers. The chains binding her dissolved, and she dropped into Raivor's waiting arms. "Hello, mate," she whispered against his chest. His answering smile could have lit up the world. "Hello, Luna." Behind them, Valdris let out a shriek of pure rage as his centuries of planning crumbled to ash. But when he raised his hands for one final attack, he found 29 wolves surrounding him, their eyes blazing with pack fury. "Your move," Elder Thane said with dark satisfaction. The ancient sorcerer looked around the circle of predators, then at Raivor and Kessara standing together in the center of the chamber, power flowing between them like liquid starlight. "This isn't over," he snarled. "Yes," Kessara said, raising one hand as silver fire danced between her fingers. "It is." The blast of pure light that erupted from her palm didn't just destroy Valdris, it unmade him, erasing 3 centuries of accumulated darkness and leaving nothing but silence in its wake.
The journey back to Blacklaw territory took 4 days, but they were the most peaceful 4 days Raivor could remember in years. Kessara rode beside him, one hand resting on his thigh as their horses picked their way through mountain passes that seemed less threatening now that Valdris's influence had been lifted from the land. The corruption that had twisted the Shadowlands was already beginning to fade, revealing glimpses of what the region had been before dark magic poisoned it. "Any regrets?" he asked as they crested a ridge that offered a view of their homeland spread out below. She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. About leaving my invisible life behind? About discovering I'm some prophesied bridge between worlds? About nearly getting corrupted by an ancient sorcerer? About any of it? Her smile was radiant as summer dawn. "Not a single one. Though I do have one concern." "What's that?" "I have no idea how to be a Luna. I've spent my entire life learning to be invisible, and now you want me to lead a pack?" Raivor brought his horse closer to hers, close enough to cup her face in one hand. "You don't learn to be a Luna, love. You just are one. The pack already knows it. They followed you into hell and back. Didn't they?" She leaned into his touch, and he felt the familiar electricity that sparked between them whenever skin met skin. But now there was something deeper beneath it, the golden thread of their bond, stronger than ever after being tested by separation and despair. "Besides," he added with a wicked grin, "I'll be there to catch you if you stumble. Promise. Always."
3 months later, the great hall of Blacklaw Castle gleamed with new construction and old traditions. Kessara stood at one of the tall windows, watching pack children play in the courtyard below while their parents worked to finish the final repairs from Valdris's attack. The physical scars were almost gone, but the deeper healing, the trust, the sense of safety was taking longer. Second thoughts? Raivor's arms slipped around her waist from behind, and she leaned back against the solid warmth of his chest. "About marrying you?" "Never." She tilted her head to accept the kiss he pressed to her temple, "though I still think we could have had a smaller ceremony. You're the Luna of the Black Claw Pack, the moon-touched of prophecy, and the woman who saved our world from a sorcerer of legend." His voice carried amused affection. "Did you really think we were going to celebrate with cake and a few close friends?" Outside, representatives from a dozen allied packs were setting up pavilions for tonight's mating ceremony. The guest list read like a who's who of werewolf nobility, all coming to witness the formal bonding of the Alpha King and his Luna. "At least tell me we don't have to make speeches," Kessara said. "Just one." Raivor's grin was wicked. "But don't worry, I'll do the talking. You just have to look radiant, and try not to accidentally shatter anything with your power." She laughed, the sound bright and free. 3 months ago, she'd been terrified of her abilities. Now, They felt as natural as breathing silver fire that danced at her fingertips when she was happy, that could heal wounds or defend the innocent as needed. The prophecies had called her a bridge between worlds, and maybe that was true. But more importantly, she was herself. Kessara Thornwick, former invisible maid, current Luna, and always the woman who'd chosen love over fear. The moon's rising, Raivor observed, nodding toward the silver disk climbing the evening sky. Then I suppose it's time. She turned in his arms, marveling again at how perfectly she fit against him. Ready to make this official? His answer came not in words but in the blazing love that flowed through their bond, warming her from the inside out. Hand in hand, they walked toward the courtyard, where their pack waited under the rising moon, ready to witness the completion of a bond that had been forged in desperation, tested by darkness, and proven stronger than any force in existence. 6 months later, Kessara placed Raivor's hand on her growing belly as they stood on their private balcony, watching young wolves train in the courtyard below. The child she carried would be born into a world where magic and nature existed in harmony, where love conquered fear, and where even the most invisible person could discover they were meant to shine. "What are you thinking about?" Raivor asked, his thumb tracing gentle circles over the place where their future rested. "How different everything is from a year ago. How much better. Any regrets?" Kessara looked out over the thriving pack, the rebuilt castle, the land slowly